Good morning and welcome to all the participants to this webinar dedicated to high-risk plants. The objective of this webinar will be to help you, to support you in the preparation of the pest list. So my colleague Eduardo will explain how to use the databases for preparing the pest list. And the second section of the webinar will be dedicated to Momordica, to the preparation of dossier for Momordica. Let me introduce myself and my colleagues that will be here on the stage with me. I'm Ciro Gardi, I'm a scientific officer in EFSA, in plant health in EFSA, and I'm coordinating the activity on high-risk plants. Here with me, Eduardo Della Peña. Please, Eduardo.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ciro. So indeed, I'm also working on this mandate at EFSA, so I'm a scientific officer. And later on, I will introduce the methodology on how to compile a pest list.
Thank you, Eduardo. And later on, Maria Chiara Rosace, a trainee with us in plant health, will describe you the section dedicated to Momordica. So now I will give you some technical advice on the webinar itself. So the webinar is being recorded. The webinar, as you understood, is in English, and also the question that you will pose to us should be in English. In this image, in the image that you see at the bottom of your screen now, you see how is the tool that you are using for attending this webinar is composed. So you have a main frame, the central frame, where you can follow the presentation. Then at the bottom of your screen, you have a rectangular frame that is dedicated only to the possible technical issue that are raising during the webinar. So let's imagine that there is a problem in the connection in the audio. You can use this frame only for digiting and for requesting some assistance from technical point of view. But the most important part of this application is the frame that you have on your right side. That is the frame that is dedicated to the question and answer section. So if you have to pose, if you want to send us a question related to the topic of this webinar, you can digit in this part of the tool, and we will receive, and all the questions will be answered, either directly online, either later on in a written form. Consider that you can start already right now to send possible questions, and the question should be question related to this part of the webinar. Now, a short introduction on the outline of this presentation of this webinar. So in a few moments, I will give a short introduction on the high-risk plant topic, and that means on the regulation 2016-2031 and the article 42 that introduced this category of plants. After this, Eduardo will introduce you the proposed methodology for the compilation of pest list. After the presentation of Eduardo, we will have 10 minutes of question and answer section. Then we have the section dedicated to Momordica that will be also followed by a question and answer section. So let me spend a few words on telling you. I think it's not needed because if you are attending this webinar, you are probably very familiar with the topic of high-risk plant and this legislation introduced by the last plant health law. But just to recap, the new plant health law of European Union, the 2016-2031 regulation, introduced with the Article 42 a new category of plants, the high-risk plants, that are plants or plant products whose import or introduction in Europe can imply a potential risk of introduction of very dangerous pests. Here, more in detail, some legislative items that Commission produced after the adoption of the new plant health law. So, as you can see, we have the implementing regulation 2018-2019 that established the list of high-risk plants. And as you know, probably for these plants, there will be the prohibition of import into the European Union territory starting from the 14th of December 2019, pending a possible risk assessment. With the implementing regulation 2018, the Commission defined in which way the applicant's country should prepare a dossier. The NPPO, the National Plant Protection Organization, should prepare the dossier, how and where they should send this dossier, and what happened to this dossier after on. So the dossier will be received by the Commission and then transferred to EFSA. And after the completed risk assessment by EFSA, the risk manager, the European Commission, will take a possible decision that can be the withdrawal of the ban of import, can be maintain the ban of import, or can be either adopt different measures. In this slide is explained in more detail all the process, especially the part that is related to EFSA activity. So starting with the applicant country, your application, your dossier prepared according to what is defined in the technical report that EFSA published, and Eduardo will later on give you some reference to this. The dossier should be sent to the European Commission. European Commission perform a quick validity check, and for the dossier that are valid, they are transmitted to EFSA. EFSA then, with the dedicated working groups, start the process of the commodity risk assessment. The commodity risk assessment can require, if in the dossier there are lack of information, there is the possibility that EFSA contact the applicant to request an integration of information. Once all the information are in EFSA and the dossier is complete, we perform the commodity risk assessment, and we publish the results as a publication on EFSA journal, and we transmit the commodity risk assessment also to the risk manager, the European Commission. And as I told you before, the European Commission will take at this point a decision on the given commodity. Now I have concluded this introductive part, and I will give the floor to Eduardo for presenting the next section on the compilation of pest list.
So thank you very much, Giro, for this very nice introduction to the topic and setting up the frame. So indeed, during the coming minutes, I will be explaining the methodology to compile a pest list. So let me first tell you that EFSA already published a technical report where you can find the details on how to prepare a dossier. So the information that you need to provide to EFSA so we can perform this risk assessment. After this webinar, you will be able to download the slides, and then you will have access to some of the hyperlinks that you see on this presentation. So you can have access, or you can Google this technical report. So we advise you to read it again. But in any case, if you submit a dossier, this dossier will have three main parts, or will deal with three areas. So you have to provide information on the commodity itself. So what type of commodity you want to export, how is this produced? So you have to give details about it. Then a second part, you will have to identify which pests are potentially associated with the commodity that you want to export to the European Union. And in the third part of this dossier, you will probably explain what are the risk mitigation measures, so the phytosanitary measures that you are taking in your country to deal with certain pests for that particular commodity that you're exporting. So in this seminar, in this webinar actually, we will try to help you to develop a methodology or give you some tips on how can you compile this pest. How can you find information to know which pests are potentially associated with your commodity in your country. Because our main objective is to help the NPPOs, that are the organizations that are submitting the dossier, on how to prepare this pest list. But perhaps it's important to define what do we mean with a pest list. So we mean here, so all the potential organisms that pose a threat to the commodity in your country of origin. So we mean here insects and mites. We also refer to plant parasitic nematodes or to fungi and bacteria, and in general any organisms that could be a threat. So we referred, or we mentioned here, we use the word pest, but we include here also diseases. But for generalization, we will use in this webinar pest. So this compilation includes all these different organisms. Before getting into details of how to do the search in different databases, we would like to give you three general aspects that you should consider when preparing a dossier. So we encourage, we ask you to prepare your dossier at the species level. So although the European regulation is at genus level, I think it will really help the risk assessment if you submit your dossier at a species level. So also this will help you to compile the pest list, because some genera, if you work at genus level, you may encounter too much information. So that's why we advise you, you can always work at genus level, but we advise you to work at the species level. You may also use the search strategy that the EFSA has proposed. So you can check this on the technical report. And what is important also, so this is the third aspect that you should bear in mind, is it's important that you keep track of the methodology you use, and that you, for the information that you include in your dossier, that you give the full references, and that you specify where have you find the information that you are providing. So now that we have given you these general considerations, perhaps we can get into the specifics of how to compile this pest list. And we are going to present this under two possible scenarios. So we understand that you are in different countries, your MPPO organization may have access to different databases. So we decided to present two possible scenarios. Perhaps you have access to commercial databases like CAP abstracts or the crop protection compendium of CABI of the Web of Science. So we will give you some tips on how to do this if you have access to these databases. But in some countries or in some cases, you may not have access to these commercial databases. So we will give you as well some suggestion on how to do this when you don't have access to commercial databases. So here you may use Google Scholar, and we will give you in the coming slides some details about this. Regardless of the database you use, you will probably start your search of pest lists using different keywords or set strings. So here in this slide, we propose you some examples of how could you do that. So you will probably include the name of your commodity, the species, the botanical species name of your commodity. Here, as an example, we use Quercus robur, and then you will combine this botanical name, the name of your commodity, with different types of organisms that could be a threat, like insects, pests, mites, plant parasitic nematodes. So you will do this combination of keywords. We also suggest you, if possible, to narrow down your search by sometimes including your country of origin or your region or a biogeographical region. And that way, you will narrow down a little bit your search, because as you can imagine, some commodities, they have such a wide distribution that if you don't narrow down your search, you might encounter too much information. So these are the general suggestions or some examples of search strings that you can use, and then we will go into the specifics of how to compile a pest list. So whether you have access or not to commercial databases, we suggest you to start your search by going to the EPO Global Database. This is a freely accessible database, and you will find there a lot of useful information. So as you can see in this slide, in the EPO Global Database, you have a search box where you can type in either the botanical name, the name of your commodity, so Quercus robur, using the example we were referring before, or you can use the EPO code for that particular plant species. By searching, you will be taken or you will be conducted to a new site where you get all the information, an overview of all the information for that plant species. In this case, Quercus robur, and you can see on the left side of the slide that there is a hyperlink to pests, and by clicking there, you will be taken to all the pests that have been reported for Quercus robur in this case. So you can retrieve this information. So this is the first step that we suggest you to do. If you have access to other databases like the Crop Protection Compendium, you can complete the search by searching in these databases for further information. So here again, you have a search box where you can type in the name of your commodity or some keywords, and you will be taken. We will be taken again to a data sheet where some pests for that particular commodity are reported, and you can add it to the list that you already had from EPO. CAP also has this CAP Direct where you can retrieve information of published scientific literature. So here, by combining again different search terms, different keywords, you can obtain references of scientific literature published on the search terms that you are using. As you can notice, on every slide here, we will give you, we give you already the address, the hyperlink to the database itself. So if you download the presentation after this webinar, you will, by clicking on these links, you can go directly to these sites. Another very broadly used database is the Web of Science. Probably many of you are familiar with it. So this is a browser, let's say, for scientific literature. And here, again, by using a combination of keywords, of search terms, you can retrieve scientific literature published on those terms. Okay. So you will get a list of references that you can screen and take to provide information of what type of species of pest species are associated with potentially associated with your commodity. So by doing this search in EPO, in the Web of Science, of Crop Protection Compendium, you will be able to compile this pest list, to have a list of different organisms that may be associated with your commodity and that they may pose a threat. But as I said before, perhaps in some of your countries or some MPPO organizations don't have access to some of these registered or commercial databases. But still, I think you can compile. You can compile a pest list. As I said before, you can always use the EPO Global Database, so you can retrieve the pests reported associated with your commodity. So this is freely accessible. So you can get this information, as I explained. But you have other alternatives. One very good alternative and very powerful is Google Scholar. Of course, most of you probably use Google for general searches, and you know that Google Scholar offers you the possibility of doing search in scientific literature. So you can use Google Scholar to search by combining, again, different keywords or search words. You can retrieve information of potential pests associated with your commodity. Of course, Google Scholars is a very powerful machine. So you may have a lot of hits, you may encounter a lot of references. So we suggest you to deal with the high volume of information that you may retrieve from Google Scholar to use a freeware, free program called Publish or Perish that can help you to deal with the information and to retrieve the references that you get from Google Scholar and to manage this and to compile a reference list using this program, this software. There is another possibility that you can explore and exploit to retrieve pests associated with your commodity, and is the use of other free databases. So there are a number of international and also national level organizations that are providing information on different commodities, and they also provide information on pests associated to plant species. And these databases that I will mention in the coming minutes are again free, so you are open to use them. And I will give you an example. In this slide, you have a screenshot of the database that the World Agroforestry Center has on different tree species. So here in this database, you can again search at species level. So you can type in Quercus robur or the commodity you are working with, and then you will find data sheets where often is reported which pest species are associated with that particular tree species or plant species. You also have some databases that are focused on certain taxa. Here, for instance, the University of California has a very interesting database on nematodes associated to plants. And using this database, Nemaplex is called, you can search which plant parasitic nematodes are associated or potentially associated with different plant species. So you can look at plant level, you can type in your plant species, and you will find which nematodes are reported associated with that commodity, with that plant species. Also, I give you here another example. This is the site of Aphids on World Plants. This is also a site that is freely accessible where you can search at genus or species level by plant, so you can search the name of your plant commodity, and you will find information on the aphids found on this plant species. The Biological Record Center in the UK has a very extensive database on plant insect associations. So again, you can search here your plant species, the name of your commodity, and you may find which phytophagous insects have been reported associated for that plant. So you can combine searches in all these databases to retrieve and to compile your pest list. I will give you a very last example on working on these specialized databases. This is ScaleNet, which is a specialized database on scale insects. So here again, you can search, you can type in your plant species, the name of your commodity, and you may find which scale insects have been reported are potentially associated to that plant species. So I think we have given you now quite some possibilities to explore and to check which potential pest species are associated with your commodity. Before ending this part of the webinar, I would like to go back to some general recommendations. I think it's very important when you do these searches that you keep track of the methodology that you are using. So you know, you write down when you perform the search, which keywords, which search strings have you used, which databases have you consulted, whether you use Kabi or EPO or you use other, maybe some other databases that we didn't explain here, but that are equally useful. I'm thinking of PubMed, for instance. So it's very important that you tell us where you perform these databases and how you did it. Also, when you make the compilation of pest list, that you references the species that you encountered. So if you find a certain pest species associated to the commodity, it's good that you provide a reference to this information. So we can always check this, and this will help us to do this risk assessment. So in general, it's advisory that you provide with all the information that is relevant to do this risk assessment. So please be thorough, and this will really help you, help us, and help you to have this dossier evaluated. And with this, Giro, if you...
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure that could be very supportive of for our potential applicants. And as Eduardo already said, try to be more complete as possible in order to facilitate us, and but in order to have a quicker, faster reply on your dossier, so a faster commodity risk assessment. Now is the time for the answering your questions, and Eduardo, I saw we have one question from Jane. She's asking if the same string that can be used, that is used for some database, can be used for all databases.
Okay, so thank you, Jane, for this question. It's very relevant. I mean, we showed here some examples of search strings that you may use, but of course you are very free to use different keywords adapted to the commodity you are dealing with. Also, you should take into account that sometimes, depending on the database you are using, the keywords that you have to use, and the combination of keywords may have a specified syntaxes. So you have to take into account this potential difference. But of course, what we show here are only suggestions. You are very free to use other search terms or combinations of keywords.
Thank you, Eduardo. We have another question that is related to, is from Mohamed, is related to the search that we can do in Easy Web of Science. Mohamed is asking if there are differences between the possible the possible search done in using the core collection or using the all databases.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So indeed, depend of the type of subscription that your organization has, you may have access to different collections within the Web of Science. So you can have access to the core collection or to all databases. So it's important. So you may retrieve different references or different type of information depending of this of your subscription. What is very important, as I said at the very end of my presentation, is that you write down, you note down where you perform this search. So if you use the Web of Science, please check whether you are consulting the core collection or any other combination of databases.
Sure. Thank you also for this answer. I think we can deal with another question. Sorry, that we just received from Jürgen, and the question from Jürgen is that okay, you say that we are proposing, we propose some string in the example that were presented. If the example provided can be enough, I would say that okay, go ahead, and then I will tell something concerning the geographical restriction.
Okay. No, again, as I said before, what we propose here are just some examples. So the applicant is completely free to use different combinations of keywords and search terms. And also, it's important to take into account in some cases the geographical region where you are doing your search. And this can go in two directions. I mean, sometimes you have so much information that by narrowing down to your your country of origin, you might tailor a little bit your search and focus on the potential pest in your country. But it's also true that in some countries, because there has not been enough research or because it's a commodity that is not thoroughly studied, you may not find so so much information if you include the geographical region. So that doesn't mean that your commodity won't have pests, or so you have to be a bit cautious in the way of how you perform these searches.
Exactly, thanks. You already covered what I would like to insist on, so the geographical location, that, as Eduardo said, in case you belong to, let's say, a country that is small, and so maybe there are not so much scientific literature production, probably in that case it's better to enlarge the geographical scopus and probably refer also to neighboring country that could have published something on a pest that maybe is present also in your country, but for which you do not have a reference in the literature. So I think with this we have to close this first section, but please hold on, and we will be back in minutes, 10 minutes maximum, and for the second part of the webinar, that is the one dedicated to Momordica. Thank you. Welcome back to all participants to the webinar. Now, as I told you before, we will have the section on Momordica. Here I have with me the speaker of this section, that is Chiara. Chiara, please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you, Ciro. Good morning, everybody. My name indeed is Maria Chiara, and I am a trainee here in the plant health team at EFSA.
Okay, so as you see from the title of the presentation, in this section is dedicated to the applicant countries that will submit a dossier for Momordica. As you probably know, but will be specified and reminded by Chiara in his presentation, the dossier for Momordica should be submitted only by the country that have the presence of Thrips palmi in their territory, and who can be exempted: the country that do not have the Thrips palmi, or the country that realize the production of Momordica in pest-free areas. But now I give the floor to Chiara for giving this presentation on Momordica. Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you, Ciro. So indeed, as Ciro said, I will give you a very short presentation on the preparation of dossier for Momordica fruits. So, as you know, Momordica is listed between other high-risk plants in the Commission Implementing Regulation 2018-2019. And it's a very peculiar case because despite the other high-risk plants, Momordica is listed as a fruit. So, the reason is because fruits of Momordica are known to host and be a pathway for the introduction of a very serious pest, which is Thrips palmi. Which means that in case in your country you have Thrips palmi, you are required to submit a dossier, as Ciro was anticipating. You need to include a series of information in this dossier, but I will tell you more in a second. I just wanted to point out that in case your country is pest-free, or in case your production area is located in a pest-free area, according to the relevant ISPMs, of course, you do not need to prepare a dossier. In this case, in fact, will be sufficient the submission of a statement by the National Plant Protection Organization of the country, stating that the production area is located in a pest-free country or in a pest-free area. Now I will give you a little bit more detail on which are the information that you have to include within your dossier. So, the case is similar to the other high-risk plants, but it's not really the same, because there are sections that you have to include and sections that you have not to include. So, in any case, you have to follow the technical report, which is the same document my colleague Eduardo was talking about in the previous presentation. You have to follow in particular Section 3 and Section 5 of the technical report, including the information on the commodity description, which is the Section 3, and information on the risk mitigation measures, which is Section 5 of the technical report. You do not have to include the Section 4 of the technical report, which is the pest list, because Momordica is in the legislation just because of Trips palmi. So it's the only pest that we are going to consider. This is why when you are filling in the checklist that you see on the right side of this presentation, in the part related to the pest list, you have to tick the box not provided in all of the paragraphs related to the pest list. So let's go a little bit more into detail on which are the information that you have to include in the different sections of your dossier. So the first section is the description of the commodity data. So you need to tell us which is the scientific name and also provide the relevant taxonomic information, as well as the description of the commodity, the production period and phenology, so forth and so on. You will have a very detailed list in the section 3 of the technical report. Let's give you some examples. So, as for the production area and the phenology of the crop, you need to indicate, for example, the period of the year when the commodity is produced and the phenology of the crop. You also need to tell us, for example, the sowing, the planting, the flowering, all information that you think is relevant to help us assess the risk on your commodity. Information on the general sanitary status and phytosanitary management are also very important. The describe of the production area designed for export, and also if there is any difference between the production area designed for exports and other production areas within the country, please just detail the information. Give us as much information as possible. The second section of your dossier, which again is the section 5 of the technical report, is the one on risk mitigation measures. This is probably the most important section because the risk assessment that will be carried out by EFSA will be mainly on the information provided in this section because of the efficacy of these treatments and the mitigation measures on the pest Trips palmi. So you need to provide technical data on the efficacy of mitigation measures, always supported by evidence, as well as the certification system, surveillance system, handling, packing, and in section 5 of the technical report, you will see lots of information, very detailed, which will tell you what you have to include in the dossier. For example, you have to describe the risk mitigation measures of the commodity and their effectiveness. And you need to give us proof, you need to give us evidence, because we have to be sure that they are effective against the pest Trips palmi. And of course, you also need to fill in all the tables reported in the Appendix C of the technical report. For example, here below, you can see a table on the pesticides. So I will give you a little bit more detail on the pesticides, as you can see in this slide, because it's very important to give us evidence on the efficacy of the products you are using, on the plant protection products that you are using against Trips palmi. We also suggest you to provide information on the officially approved label, which, for example, can include the dosage, the application time, as well as the active ingredients within the products that you are using, so that we will have enough information to assess the risk. In fact, in this slide, which is a very short slide but very important, we are underlying the need to provide as much information as possible and as detailed as possible, because of course we have to be sure when we are assessing the risk. What is going to happen once you submit the dossier to the European Commission? EFSA will receive the dossier. We will perform an assessment on the efficacy of the measures that you are using against Trips palmi, and afterwards we will deliver an opinion to the European Commission, and it will be the European Commission, taking into account the risk assessment that has been carried out by EFSA, to take a decision on your dossier. So I'm almost finished. This is just a slide summarizing very important messages that you have to remember and to take into account when you are preparing your dossier. Before submitting, you need to be sure that you provided all the information following Section 3 and Section 5 of the technical report. You provide information relevant to facilitate us in assessing the risk, and that the information you provide is supported by evidence, always. We will accept every format of the dossier, so you can decide to send the dossier in a pen drive, in a memory stick, in a CD-ROM, but probably the most common way is to submit it as attachment to an email. And in any case, it would be good to submit also an index listing all the attachments to the email so that we will be sure and you will be sure that we have everything you want us to have. And with this, I finished my presentation and I give you back the floor to my colleague Ciro.
Thank you, Chiara, for again a very nice and exhaustive presentation of Momordica. I think our counterpart, our potential applicant, will be much more informed on what they should do and if they have to do something in specific. So now let's go to the question that we have received on this. We have a question from Hélène, and Hélène, she's asking if this, what we have said, also apply for the product that are made starting from Momordica fruit. So the byproduct that are produced starting from Momordica fruit. I can answer directly to this question. In this case, Hélène, is not applying because the legislation refers only to the plants, the fruit, in this case to the fruit. So if there is a byproduct that is obtained starting from the fruit of Momordica, in this case is not applying this rule. Also because there wouldn't be associated risk of having the pest probably. So let's see other questions. We have a question from John, and he is asking which kind of evidence they need to provide for Momordica. I think it would be nice if you reinforce this, what you already told, but I think it would be more efficacy if you stick to this question again.
Of course. So the question was from
John.
John. So thank you for your question, John. And you have to follow detailing the Section 5 of the technical report on this, because it will also tell you which kind of evidence and information you have to provide. Just to give you an example, information on the plant protection area, on the efficacy of the pesticide on Momordica, you can find the answers to this question, for example, also in papers, articles, scientific papers that have been published. It would be good also, just to give you another example, to give us evidence of the interception of Momordica fruits from your country. So you can go, for example, to the Eurofit database, to the Eurofit website, and check whether in the last few years there have been any kind of interceptions on Trips palmi on Momordica fruits from your country, of course. And
no,
do you have any other?
No, I think
point?
Just integrating this answer, just summarizing, it is important that you provide, as Chiara said, information. We have to understand how the production of Momordica is realized. So everything related to the cultivation, the production, the preparation of the fruit to be exported, and everything is done for limiting, for reducing the risk of having Trips palmi.
Exactly.
So let me see. I think yes, we have probably a time for another question. We have a question from Mila. She's asking if we can provide any ideas on what can contribute to effective mitigation measure for Trips palmi on Momordica.
Okay.
So effective mitigation measure can be any kind of measure. So we are not sticking, it's not necessarily referring to chemical measures, so the use of plant production product, in this case insecticide, but can be any measure, also crop management measure, or kind of cultivation. Let's imagine that you are cultivating in a protected environment, in greenhouse. Of course, this is a measure that can be quite effective in preventing the infestation of Trips palmi, or can be also having a measure on a surveillance or survey that can help you to understand how, if the presence of the pest is in the country and in which part of the country could be present or not. So we are not limiting to any specific, we are not referring to specific measure, but different measure, that the one that are proposed also in the technical report can be listed as a potentially effective. So I think we have time only for another question. Let's see. Okay, we have probably this is the last we can answer. We have a question from Jay. Again, it was already told by you, but we can reinforce this statement.
Yes.
They say they do not have TRIPS palmy. What they should proceed. So please, Chiara, remind what happened if a country has not TRIPS palmy in their territory.
Of course. So, as I was saying, in case you don't have TRIPS palmy in the area, you should provide an official statement by the National Plant Protection Organization of your country, stating that the country is pest-free. There can also be the possibility that the country is not pest-free, but the production area is located in a pest-free area, according to the ISPMs, the relevant ISPMs, which, for example, you can follow the ISPM 4, the ISPM 8. They all give a definition of pest-free area, and they describe what you have to do to define a pest-free area. So in this case, in case the production area is located in a pest-free area, again, is sufficient to provide a statement from the National Plant Protection Organization, and you have no need to submit a full dossier to the European Commission.
Thank you, Chiara. Now I think we should stop the questions, but if you still have doubt, you can always write to EFSA, you can write to Alpha mailbox. We have also an official functional mailbox that is highriskplants@efsa.europa.eu, and you can find this email address also on our website, also on the presentation. And before concluding, I would like also to thank all the other colleagues that contributed to the organization of this webinar, either the colleagues from my team, Svetla Kozelska and Stefano Preti, either the colleagues from other unit, Irene Munoz, and the colleagues from the organizational side, so Francesco, Carla, Felix, Andrea, and also the colleagues in our unit that supported the preparation and the organization of this webinar, and the colleagues that in European Commission supported also us from on the other side, from the risk manager side of this activity. Here you can find some useful references and links that are present in the presentation. So if you download the presentation on our website, you will have this. And before concluding, I would suggest you to eventually give a feedback to us, providing possible ideas for improving the organization of future webinar. I thank you all for attending this webinar, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder, we will have a second section of the webinar in the afternoon in case you missed something and you want to follow us again. Thank you for listening.